They used to laugh at us, the Germans. You could see it in their flight reports, hear it in the chatter we sometimes picked up over the radio, even in the way they spoke about the P-47, like it was some kind of joke. A fat, slow American brute that couldn't climb, couldn't turn, couldn't dance with their sleek Messerschmitts or Focke-Wulfs. They said we flew tractors with wings. Back then, I used to care what they thought. I was 23, barely old enough to know anything about the world, but old enough to understand pride. The first time I sat in the cockpit of that Thunderbolt, I remember the weight of it, physically and otherwise. The thing was massive, heavy on the ground, like it didn't want to fly at all. But when that Pratt & Whitney R2800 roared to life beneath me, something inside me answered. It wasn't beauty or grace. It was power, a kind of brutal, unapologetic power that shook the earth itself. Even now, after all these years, I can still feel that vibration in my bones when I close my eyes. That was the summer of '44 in England. The fields around our airstrip were still wet with morning fog, and the grass smelled of oil and mud. The airmen used to joke that the weather in that part of the country was Germany's best defense. Every dawn started the same way. Grey skies, the hum of engines warming up, and the metallic taste of nerves sitting on the tongue. You could always tell who was new. The rookies would pace around their planes, checking and rechecking every bolt and panel, whispering little prayers into their gloves. The veterans, the ones who'd seen too much, they just sat quietly, staring into the mist, drinking their coffee like it was poison they'd grown used to. I guess I fell somewhere in between. I wasn't new anymore, but I hadn't yet turned numb. I still had hope, still believed that every mission might bring us closer to going home. There was a mechanic named Dugan who worked on my plane. Short guy, big hands, always chewing on something, gum, tobacco, or sometimes just a piece of wire when he was thinking. He used to pat the side of my P-47 before every mission and say, "She'll bring you back, Ray. She always does." He believed it. I wanted to believe it too. You had to. You couldn't climb into that cockpit without faith. Faith in your machine, your squadron, your luck, and maybe in God, if you had any left. We didn't talk much about faith though. It was bad luck too. That morning, our target was a railway yard near Caen. The Germans were moving fuel and ammunition through it, trying to slow the Allied push inland. We were supposed to hit it hard, make a mess of their logistics. Simple on paper, like most suicide missions are. I remember strapping in, feeling the leather harness dig into my shoulders, the smell of metal and gun oil heavy in the cockpit. Cole was my wingman. He'd been flying with me since Italy. He had this easy smile, the kind that made you think he'd live forever. Just before takeoff, he leaned toward me from his plane and mimed lighting a cigarette, grinning. I laughed. It was our little ritual, pretending like it was just another day, just another job. When the wheels lifted off the ground, I felt that familiar mix of fear and freedom. The fog fell away beneath us, and the land opened up like a patchwork quilt of greens and browns, rivers glinting like ribbons of glass. England faded behind us, and France came into view, broken, wounded, still smoking from the invasion. You could see columns of black rising from the towns below, little plumes of somebody's yesterday burning away. The radio crackled now and then, the clipped voices of command guiding us east. Every time I heard static, I flinched. Static could mean flak, could mean fighters, could mean nothing at all, but it was enough to keep your pulse racing. We crossed the channel in silence, 8 of us in formation, the Thunderbolts gleaming under a pale sun. The clouds ahead were tinged red and gold, like some cruel sunrise painted for soldiers. I remember thinking how strange it was that the sky could be so beautiful when everything below it was dying. That thought haunted me, and it still does. Maybe that's why I remember that mission so clearly, not just for what happened, but for what I felt before it all went to hell. There's a stillness that comes before combat, a deceptive calm, like the world is holding its breath. I felt that stillness sitting there, fingers trembling just above the trigger, waiting for the order. Cole's voice broke the silence. "See those trains down there, Ray? Looks like a big day for the Nazis." He laughed, but it was a hollow sound. I glanced over at him, saw his gloved hand give me a thumbs up, and then I saw something else, a flash of sunlight off the wings of 2 German fighters circling above the yard. They were already waiting for us. For a moment, I thought of turning back, of calling it in, but the order came before I could think. "Thunderbolt Squadron, commence attack." My stomach dropped. I shoved the throttle forward, and the world tilted into a dive. The engine roared so loud it drowned out everything. The wind, the fear, the laughter of those who thought we'd never make it back. Funny thing is, the Germans weren't wrong about the P-47. It was heavy, and it was slow, but they never understood what that meant. It meant you could take a hit and keep flying. It meant your guns didn't just bark. They tore through steel and bone like thunder splitting the sky. They laughed because they didn't know what it felt like to face 8 50 caliber Brownings at once. They didn't know yet, but they would. Tell me where you're watching this from. I'd like to know how far these old war echoes reach. We were already in the dive when the flak started blooming below us. Those black puffs of smoke that looked almost harmless from a distance, like dark flowers opening in the morning sky. But inside that cockpit, each one felt like a personal invitation to hell. The smell of burnt cordite and exhaust filled my lungs, and every nerve in my body was on fire. The Germans had spotted us long before we crossed the tree line. Their guns tracked us with a precision that came from experience, and I could almost feel their fingers tightening around their triggers, waiting for that perfect moment. I kept my eyes locked on the target, the rail yards spreading out beneath me like a mechanical beast, tracks crisscrossing like veins, locomotives lined up like sleeping giants waiting to wake. My altimeter needle dropped fast. Cole's voice was in my headset, calm but tight. "Stay low, Ray. We'll hit the east line first." I just nodded, though he couldn't see me. My hand was steady on the stick, but my heart wasn't. When I squeezed the trigger, the world disappeared into sound and light. The 8 Brownings tore through the air, a violent staccato rhythm that shook the whole plane. The ground below erupted, metal shrapnel, fire, smoke, and the screams of machinery dying. I aimed for the engines, for the tanks full of fuel, and watched the explosions roll across the yard like a storm. It was beautiful in a terrible way, the kind of beauty that leaves you cold. Cole's Thunderbolt streaked past mine, his bombs hitting dead center. The blast wave rocked my plane, and I could feel the heat even through the armor. Then came the fighters, 2 Messerschmitts dropping from the sun, their silhouettes sharp against the blinding sky. I heard Cole shout, "Bandits high!" and I jerked the stick hard left. The G's hit me like a hammer, pressing me down into the seat, blood rushing out of my head. The Germans dove fast, too fast, confident we were easy prey. They weren't wrong to think that. I'd seen them before, those sleek, graceful birds with the black crosses on their wings. They moved like predators, sharp, efficient, almost arrogant in their precision. I could feel their rounds hitting the ground behind me, the sharp whip-whip of tracers slicing through the air. My instincts screamed to climb, to run, but the Thunderbolt didn't climb well. It fought against you, heavy and stubborn, like a bull refusing to charge until it was damn good and ready. I pushed the nose down instead, straight toward the treetops, the altimeter spinning like mad. The Germans followed, laughing in their cockpits, probably thinking they had us pinned. I could almost hear them through the radio static, their voices smug and sure. Cole was still behind me somewhere, his voice cutting in and out. "Ray, you got 2 on your tail. Brake right." I banked hard, the wings groaning under the strain, and for a split second I saw them, 2 silver arrows diving after me, the sun flashing off their canopies. There's a strange thing that happens in combat. Time stretches, folds, turns inside out. A second feels like a lifetime, and a lifetime feels like a second. I remember the way the horizon spun, the colors smearing together, green, brown, blue, smoke, flame, and the sound of the engines screaming in protest. I wasn't thinking anymore. I wasn't even flying, really. The plane was flying me. Every movement was instinct, muscle memory carved by fear. I pulled up just as the tree line filled my vision, the Thunderbolt groaning, but obeying. The Messerschmitts followed, but they were too fast, too eager. One of them clipped a tree, just to graze, but enough to send him spiraling. I saw the flash of his wing tearing away, the black cross tumbling into fire. For a moment, I felt nothing. Not triumph, not relief, just emptiness. The other one stayed on me, relentless. His tracers stitched the air around my wings, and I could hear the dull thuds as rounds hit the fuselage. Then something changed. The fear burned away, replaced by a cold, focused anger. I leveled out, dropped my speed just enough to bait him in, and waited. The Thunderbolt might have been heavy, but it had one trick the Germans always underestimated. It could dive faster than anything in the sky, so I let him come closer. I could almost feel his bullets grazing my tail. When he was close enough that I could see the glint of his goggles, I shoved the stick forward and dove. The world became a blur, the air howling around the cockpit, the speed pressing me into my harness. My teeth rattled, the wings groaned like they might tear off. The Messerschmitt followed, but too late. I pulled back hard just above the river valley, and as I climbed out of the dive, I rolled over and came in behind him. For the first time, he was in my sights. When I fired, it wasn't rage or glory, it was necessity. The Brownings spat fire, each one a thunderclap. I watched the rounds walk across his fuselage, sparks flying as they tore into his engine. Smoke poured out, and he tried to climb, but the P-47's guns were merciless. The whole plane lit up, the canopy shattering, a burst of flame blooming in the air. I saw him bail out, his parachute opening like a pale ghost against the blue. He was alive, and I was glad, more glad than I thought I would be, because deep down, killing never felt like victory, it just felt like survival. When it was over, the sky went quiet again. The radio crackled, and Cole's voice came through, shaky but laughing. "You got him, Ray? Damn, you actually got him." I didn't answer right away. I just watched the smoke trails twisting through the air, watched the rail yards still burning below, and thought about the men who'd been down there when we dropped our bombs. You tell yourself they're soldiers, just targets. But you know better. War doesn't care about the different. We turned west, heading home. The sun was low now, a bleeding orange sinking behind the horizon. My hands were still shaking on the stick. I remember looking at the bullet holes in my wings, the paint scorched black, the smell of fuel seeping into the cockpit. And yet, the Thunderbolt flew steady, loyal as always. Dugan had been right. She brought me back. Sometimes, when I think about that day, I can still hear their laughter, the Germans laughing at the fat, slow American plane. But I also hear the silence that came after. That silence was mine. If stories like this remind you that courage often hides behind fear, subscribe. You'll want to hear what happened next. The flight back from Caen should have been simple, just sky and silence, the worst behind us. But the war never let you off that easy. We hadn't even reached the coast when the radio crackled, a voice I didn't recognize calling out in a panic. Another squadron, hit hard near Falaise, needing cover. I looked at Cole, saw the hesitation flicker in his eyes through the canopy reflection. He didn't have to say it. We both knew command would want us to turn back. We were low on fuel, half our ammo gone, but the rule was clear. You didn't leave your own behind. I heard myself say, turning back, before the words had even finished forming in my head. Cole groaned, cursed, and followed. The sea of clouds swallowed us again, the sun burning holes through the white as we descended back into hell. The radio was chaos, screams, static, coordinates shouted through fear. I could see the black plumes ahead where they were pinned down, German fighters everywhere, darting through the sky like wasps around a wounded animal. Our boys were outnumbered, the kind of odds that make you wonder if heroism is just another word for stupidity. But it didn't matter anymore. We were already diving, throttles wide open, the thunderbolts howling. My body felt welded to the seat, the vibration so violent I could barely read the instruments. Below, I caught sight of one of our planes, a P-51, spiraling with smoke trailing from its tail. The pilot was still inside, trying to bail. I clenched my teeth and rolled, leveling out above him. That's when I saw the German on his tail, a yellow-nosed 109, cutting in for the kill. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just pulled the trigger. The tracers stitched across the sky, bright lines of fury, and the 109 jerked violently. I saw pieces of his wing shear away. Then his engine caught fire. The Mustang broke free, its pilot ejecting just in time, his chute opening like a miracle. For a heartbeat, the sky was beautiful. Then more came. Too many. 6, maybe 8 of them, circling high, waiting for us to burn through what little we had left. Cole's voice came through the static, shouting, "We can't fight them all!" He was right, but there was nowhere to run. I saw one diving straight for me, the sunlight flashing off his propeller like a blade. I yanked the stick, twisted, rolled, the G's pressing me down until the edges of my vision went black. I caught a glimpse of his nose cannon spitting fire, shells ripping through the air. One round grazed my right wing, tearing through the panel like paper. The plane lurched, metal screaming. My breath caught in my throat. I pushed the throttle as far as it would go, the engine roaring, smoke coughing from the vents. The Thunderbolt was hurt, but it was still alive. I turned into the attack, head on. That was the only way. The Messerschmitt came straight at me, confident, maybe laughing again. I waited until he filled my sights, until his propeller looked like it would cut through my cockpit, and then I fired. 8 guns, 1 heartbeat. The recoil slammed through my arms, the smell of gunpowder filling the canopy. I saw his nose burst into flames, the cockpit shattering, and he vanished in a bloom of fire and metal. I flew straight through the debris cloud, fragments bouncing off the fuselage like hail. By the time I leveled out, I could see the battlefield below, fields torn apart, smoke rising from what used to be roads, the wreckage of both friend and foe scattered across the ground. Cole's voice crackled again. "I'm hit! She's leaking fuel! My chest tightened. I scanned the sky until I saw him, limping west, smoke trailing behind. 2 German fighters had broken off and were closing in on him. I banked hard, dove again, the altimeter spinning, my hands slick with sweat. I fired long bursts to scare them off, but one stayed on him, determined. Cole tried to climb, tried to shake him, but the engine sputtered. I shouted into the radio, "Bail out! Now!" No answer. I fired again, missed, closed the distance, the German dead in my sights. But before I could pull the trigger, Cole's plane exploded. A flash, a roar, then nothing. The sky went silent, my throat locked. I didn't even realize I was screaming until my headset cut the sound with a shriek of static. I climbed higher, searching for the bastard who did it, my heart pounding so loud I could barely think. I spotted him banking away, probably thinking his job was done. He didn't see me coming. I came from above, nose down, the wind screaming past the canopy. I didn't aim this time. I just held the trigger down until the barrels glowed red. The tracers found him, tore through his fuselage, through his wings, through him. He went down in pieces. I didn't feel anything, not victory, not revenge, just emptiness. The kind that follows when something you love is suddenly gone. Cole had been with me since Italy, through mud, through fire, through nights we didn't think we'd survive. And now he was gone, just like that. The fight broke apart soon after. Reinforcements arrived from another squadron, and the Germans scattered. I should have felt relief, but I didn't. I just wanted to go home. The Thunderbolt was limping, the right wing half shot, the gauges flickering, oil pressure dropping fast. I didn't even know if I could make it back to England, but I tried anyway. The horizon was smeared with smoke, the sea glinting beneath the dying light. Every few seconds, the engine coughed, sputtered, threatened to quit. I started talking to her then, like she was alive, like Dugan always said she was. "Just a little further, girl. Just a little more." My voice cracked. Halfway over the channel, I saw something glinting in the water below. A parachute. Someone had gone down, probably one of ours. For a moment I thought about turning back, about circling to see who it was, but I couldn't. The engine was dying, and if I didn't keep going, we'd both end up in that cold water. I flew on, every minute an eternity, every vibration a prayer. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in gold and blood. When the English coast finally appeared, I almost cried. I radioed in, voice trembling, returning from Falaise, 1 bird down, 1 confirmed enemy destroyed. I didn't mention Cole, couldn't, not yet. When the wheels touched the runway, the Thunderbolt groaned and skidded to a stop, smoke rising from the engine. I just sat there for a while, hands still gripping the stick, staring through the cracked glass at the horizon. The others came running, shouting, cheering maybe, but their voices were distant. I climbed out slowly, legs shaking, boots hitting the ground heavier than they ever had before. Dugan met me, his face pale when he saw the damage. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me, and then at the sky, like he already knew who wasn't coming back. That night, I couldn't sleep. None of us could. We sat around the barracks, the air thick with silence. Someone poured whiskey, passed it around. When it came to me, I didn't drink. I just stared at the glass and thought about Cole's grin, the way he always winked before takeoff, the way he made everything seem less terrifying. The laughter of the Germans didn't echo anymore. Just his voice, just his absence. I don't remember the next morning clearly, only fragments. The clatter of boots outside the tent, the hum of engines warming up, the metallic rattle of tools striking the hangar floor. It all felt distant, like hearing life through a wall. The smell of oil and damp earth filled the air, and the sky hung low and grey, the kind of sky that never promises mercy. Someone had placed Cole's flight jacket on his bunk, neatly folded, his goggles resting on top. No one said anything about it. We didn't have to. Every man there carried his own empty space, and that one just happened to have a name. Dugan found me standing beside the Thunderbolt, staring at the bullet holes that scarred her skin. "She took a beating," he said softly, touching one of the torn panels. "But she brought you back. Always said she would." I nodded, but the words didn't stick. He handed me a wrench and said, "Help me fix her up. She deserves it." I didn't argue. We worked in silence for hours, tightening, patching, polishing metal that still smelled like smoke and death. At one point, I caught myself talking to her under my breath, telling her I was sorry. Sorry for pushing her too far. Sorry for getting Cole killed. Sorry for still being alive when better men weren't. Dugan just kept his eyes down and didn't interrupt. That afternoon, briefing came early. Command wanted us back in the air. No rest, no pause. There was always another target. The war didn't care about grief. The war only cared about momentum. The next mission was deep into German territory, a convoy moving east near Rouen. Heavy escort expected. I remember staring at the map, tracing the line with my finger, realizing we'd be flying over the same region where Cole went down. It felt like a test, or maybe a punishment. Either way, I didn't refuse. Part of me didn't want to come back this time. When dawn broke, the world looked washed out, drained of color. I strapped in, the seat still cold against my back. The engine came alive, the same violent growl that had once filled me with pride, now just another noise in a war full of them. We took off in formation, 8 Thunderbolts cutting through the mist. The air was smooth, deceptively calm. I kept scanning the horizon, half expecting to see Cole's plane beside me, that familiar glint of sunlight off his wings. Habit is cruel like that. It tricks you into believing ghosts still have form. As we crossed the Seine, flak began to rise from the fields below. Black puffs again, those blooming death flowers, but I hardly flinched. The others broke formation, diving toward the convoy, the crackle of gunfire echoing through the radio. I stayed high at first, watching, trucks scattered like ants as explosions rolled through the valley. Then I saw them, 5, maybe 6 German fighters breaking from the clouds, diving straight into our formation. I pushed the throttle, felt the surge, the cockpit shaking like it wanted to tear apart, the sky filled with tracers, flashes of red and orange streaking past. One of our boys went down immediately, a bright trail of fire carving through the grey. I could hear someone screaming over the radio, begging for help, but no one could reach him. The fight dissolved into chaos, planes twisting, rolling, diving. Every direction looked wrong. I caught one Messerschmitt in a climbing turn, rolled behind him, lined up the shot. My breath stopped, the Brownings thundered, and the rounds chewed through his fuselage. He burst into smoke, spiraled down. I didn't feel a thing. No satisfaction, no rage, just emptiness, the kind that burns cold. Another came from above, guns flashing. I banked hard, felt the bullets graze my tail. I rolled again, climbed, dove. The air screamed around me. My heart pounded so fast I thought it might give out. The radio was pure madness. Voices shouting, static curses. I caught pieces. I'm hit! Pull out! Where's the cover? I turned toward the sound of one voice I recognized. Meyer, another pilot from my squadron. He was flying low, smoke trailing, a German glued to his tail. I dove in from above, squeezing the trigger, tracers cutting across the sky. The German peeled off, but not before his last burst found its mark. Meyer's plane lurched, rolled, and ploughed into the ground below. The explosion bloomed like a dying sun. I heard myself whisper his name, but there was no answer, just the wind. Then something snapped. The fear was gone, the fatigue, the guilt, all of it burned away. What was left was pure instinct, the kind that doesn't care about survival. I rolled into the pack, guns blazing, chasing shadows through the clouds. One came at me head on, too close to dodge. We fired at the same time. The windshield cracked, shards spraying across my face. My right arm went numb. I didn't even know if I was hit. I just kept firing until he vanished into smoke. The cockpit filled with the smell of burned metal and cordite. I could barely see through the haze. The fight dragged on until there was nothing left but wreckage and silence. The convoy was gone, the valley burning. Only 3 of us made it out. We limped back toward the coast, engines coughing, fuel low, wings torn. My radio was dead. The world felt quiet again, too quiet. I looked down and saw the river glinting, winding through the fields, the same river we'd crossed so many times before. Somewhere beyond it was where Cole had. Without thinking, I banked right, flying low along its edge. The others called out for me to stay in formation, but I didn't listen. I followed the river until I saw it, an open patch of scorched earth where the grass had never grown back. Even from up there, I knew it was the spot, the place where he'd died. I flew one slow circle over it, my hand resting on the throttle, my chest tight. For the first time since that day, I whispered his name aloud. The wind carried it away. By the time I landed back at base, the sun was already setting. The sky was red, like the whole world was bleeding out. I shut down the engine and just sat there, listening to it tick as it cooled. Dugan was waiting, grease-stained as always. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "We heard about Meyer. You okay?" I didn't answer. I climbed down, my boots hitting the ground heavy. The hangar smelled like oil and ghosts. I walked past Cole's empty bunk on the way to my cot and stopped. His jacket was still there, same as before. I sat down beside it and ran my fingers over the worn leather, still soft from the last time he'd worn it. For a moment, I thought I could still smell the faint trace of his cigarettes. That night, I didn't write in my logbook, couldn't. Words felt too small, too clean for what we'd done. I just sat there, staring at my hands, shaking, scarred, still alive. The Germans might have laughed once, but I wasn't laughing anymore. None of us were. War strips the laughter out of you one mission at a time, until all that's left is the silence afterward and the faces you can't forget. Tell me, have you ever lost someone you still talk to in your head, even years later? Type yes in the comments. Sometimes that's the only way we keep them alive. The days after Rouen were a blur of noise and silence. The engines never stopped humming. The ground crews never stopped shouting. But inside me, everything went still, like my mind had slipped somewhere the war couldn't reach, even though my body was still right there in it. The rain came down for a week straight, turning the runway into rivers of mud, the kind that swallowed boots and made every step feel like dragging ghosts. Some of the new boys arrived from the States. Fresh faces, shiny boots, clean uniform. They looked at us like we were something between legends and warnings. They still believed in things like glory. I envied them for that. Command said we'd have 48 hours of rest before the next run. They called it downtime, as if rest was something you could schedule between nightmares. I tried sleeping, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flash of Cole's plane breaking apart, the glare of tracer fire, the smear of smoke across the sky. So I didn't sleep. I walked instead, up and down the airfield, through the hangars, past the rows of battered Thunderbolts lined like soldiers waiting for confession. I watched Dugan patch bullet holes like a priest tending wounds. He hummed to himself sometime, old country song, slow and cracked, like the world before the war still whispered through him. I didn't tell him, but those little tunes kept me sane. One morning, just before dawn, I found myself sitting at the end of the runway, coffee cooling beside me, the fog curling low over the grass. The horizon was pale pink, the kind of colour that didn't belong to war. I thought about home, Ohio, the smell of wet cornfields after rain, the sound of my mother's wind chime on the porch. I could almost hear it. It struck me then how long it had been since I'd really felt something that wasn't fear or exhaustion. Even happiness felt dangerous, like letting your guard down too long. We were all prisoners of luck, and luck was a liar. That afternoon a letter came, the kind folded 3 times and creased with fingerprints. It was from Cole's sister, sent before she even knew he was gone. She'd written to thank me for looking after him over there. I sat on my cot, reading the words over and over until they blurred. She talked about his guitar, the one he used to play at family gatherings, about how he promised to teach her a song when he came home. I wanted to write back, to tell her he'd died brave, that it was quick, that he hadn't felt a thing. But I couldn't, because none of that was true. It wasn't quick, and bravery had nothing to do with it. It was just chaos, luck, and a sky that didn't care who it took. So I folded the letter back up and kept it in my pocket. In the evenings, the officers would gather in the mess hall, swapping stories, pretending laughter still meant something. I sat with them sometimes, nodded in the right places, even smiled when someone cracked a joke, but my heart wasn't there. Every laugh felt like a betrayal. I'd catch myself staring out the window instead, watching the planes lined up in the dusk, their silhouettes black against the dying light. They looked peaceful, almost holy, until you remembered what they were made for. There's something cruel about beauty born from destruction. A few nights later, Dugan came to find me. He had grease on his face and that same chewed-up piece of gum in his mouth. "You're not yourself, Ray," he said, crouching beside me. "You keep flying on the outside, but you're grounded inside. That's no way to survive this thing." I didn't answer. He took off his cap and ran a hand through his hair. "I've seen too many pilots lose it up," he continued. "Not because they got scared, but because they stopped caring whether they made it back. Don't let that be you." He left after that. No lecture, no sympathy, just truth. And I hated him because he was right. I was already halfway gone. That night, for the first time since Cole's death, I opened my logbook again. I stared at the blank page for what felt like hours before writing a single line. Sometimes the silence after the mission is louder than the engines ever were. Then I closed it. Maybe that was enough. The next day, a replacement pilot joined our squadron. His name was Harris, barely 20, freckled, a nervous laugh that cracked when he spoke. They assigned him as my new wingman. He shook my hand like he'd just met a hero. "Heard you flew with Cole. They say you two were the best in the group." I looked at him for a long moment and then said, "We were lucky, that's all." I didn't tell him luck runs out. Maybe he'd find out on his own, or maybe he'd be one of the lucky ones who got to grow old enough to forget. That evening, I took him up on a training run. The clouds were thin, the light golden, the kind of sky that tricks you into believing there's peace somewhere. We flew low over the countryside, the fields stretching endlessly beneath us. Harris whooped over the radio, excited like a kid, and I felt something shift inside. For a moment, hearing that unbroken laughter, I remembered what it felt like to be new, to believe the world might survive this madness. Maybe that's what kept me from breaking completely, the hope that not everyone would end up like me. When we landed, Harris said, "That was incredible. You make it look easy." I smiled for the first time in weeks, a real smile, the kind that hurt. "It's never easy," I told him. "You just learn how to pretend it is." He nodded, not understanding, but someday he would. That night, the air was quiet. No flak, no engines, no shouting, just the wind through the tents and the soft clinking of metal cooling in the hangars. I lay on my cot staring at the canvas ceiling, listening to the faint rhythm of rain starting to fall again. Somewhere outside, Dugan was probably humming that same tune. And for the first time, it didn't sound sad, it just sounded human. The war didn't end all at once. It faded, like the sound of an engine cooling after a long flight. Gradually, unevenly, leaving behind an echo that never really stopped. We kept flying missions until the very end, though by the spring of 45, the sky already felt different. The fear was still there, but duller somehow, worn down by exhaustion. The Germans fought hard to the last, but you could sense the desperation in their movement. Their formations were thinner, their attacks less coordinated, like men who knew they'd already lost, but refused to admit it. I remember one mission late that April, a sweep over a collapsing front near the Rhine. Hardly any resistance, just smoke, wreckage, and the occasional flash of gunfire from somewhere below. We flew through it in silence, and for the first time no one cheered when it was over. It felt less like victory, and more like the end of a long illness. When the surrender finally came, I was sitting in the hangar, boots up on a crate, a wrench still in my hand. Dugan came running in, waving a newspaper and shouting that it was over. The words didn't sink in at first. Over. They sounded unreal. For months afterward, I'd still wake before dawn expecting the alarm, still glance at the sky to check the weather, still smell oil and think it was time to fly. Old habits die harder than men, I suppose. When they told us we'd be shipping home, I didn't cheer like the others. I just sat there, staring at my Thunderbolt, patched, scarred, her paint faded from too many suns. She'd saved me more times than I could count, but leaving her behind felt like betrayal. She was more than metal to me. She was every scream, every prayer, every second chance I didn't deserve. The trip back across the Atlantic was quiet. The ship was full of men like me, alive, but not the same kind of alive we'd been before. We talked, sure, but never about the fighting. No one mentioned names. The silence between conversations was heavy, like we were all carrying something we couldn't put down. I spent most of the voyage leaning on the rail, staring at the water. The ocean didn't care who'd won or lost. It just kept moving, steady and endless. Somewhere halfway home, I thought of Cole again. I imagined him standing beside me, his grin catching the sea breeze, his laugh cutting through the waves. For a second, I almost turned to speak to him. Then I remembered. When we docked in New York, the city was alive with celebration. Flags, music, crowds, people shouting, hugging strangers, kissing in the streets. It was beautiful, but I felt like I was watching it all from underwater. A woman handed me a flower and said, "Thank you for saving us." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't saved anyone, not really. The ones who were gone had done that. I just happened to make it through. Survival isn't heroism, it's luck, wrapped in guilt. I took the train west, back to Ohio. The fields were green again. The air smelled of spring. My parents met me at the station, older, smaller than I remembered. My mother cried when she saw me. My father shook my hand first, like I was a stranger returning from some far-off place, which, in a way, I was. The first night home, I slept in my old bed, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. The quiet was too deep. I woke up twice, sweating, heart racing, convinced I'd heard the whine of an engine overhead. It took months before I stopped ducking at loud noises, before I stopped scanning the sky whenever I stepped outside. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch at dusk, watching the sun melt into the field, listening to that old wind chime. The sound was soft, easy, and for a moment I could almost forget. But then the memories would drift back, the smell of burning fuel, the tremor in the controls, the laughter of the men before takeoff. You never really leave the war, you just carry it quieter. Some nights, I'd dream of flying again, not in combat, but just flying. No gunfire, no fear, just the hum of the engine and the wide open sky. I'd wake up smiling, then realize it wasn't real. That smile would fade slow, like the morning fog. Harris wrote to me after he got back, said he was thinking about staying in the Air Force. said he wanted to make something of the peace we'd fought for. I told him he should. I didn't have it in me to keep flying. The air had given me everything it could and taken everything it wanted. I sold my uniforms, kept only the goggles and the patch from my jacket. Sometimes I catch myself tracing the edge of that patch, US Army Air Forces, and remembering how proud I once was to wear it. Pride's a funny thing. It fades, but it never disappears. It just changes shape. Years passed. I found work at a repair shop, fixing engines that didn't shoot or fly or kill. The smell of oil still followed me, but it didn't bother me anymore. I married eventually, had kids. They grew up asking about the war, about the planes, about whether I was scared. I told them pieces, never the whole thing. The whole thing would have been too heavy for anyone else to carry. Maybe one day I'll tell them everything, or maybe I'll just let the stories fade with. Sometimes I wonder what the Germans thought when they saw us coming. Not the generals or the pilots who chased us through the clouds, but the boys on the ground, looking up as the sky tore open with fire. Maybe they hated us, maybe they feared us, or maybe they were just too tired to feel anything at all. I think about that more than I should. How the war wasn't a story of heroes and villains, but of boys too young to know what forever meant, dying in places they couldn't pronounce. We were told to fight for freedom, and I suppose we did. But what we were really fighting for, when you strip it down, was each other. The man on your wing, the mechanic who kept your plane alive, the letter waiting in your pocket. Everything else was noise. Now, so many years later, I still hear that noise sometimes. Not in the air, but in the quiet moments between heartbeats. It comes back in flashes. The smell of oil and gunpowder, the taste of fear thick in my throat, the way the sunlight hit Cole's goggles before every takeoff. He's still 23 in my mind, grinning like the world couldn't touch him. I'm old now, older than I ever thought I'd be, and sometimes I feel guilty for that, for all the things he never got to see, the peace, the quiet, the way the light looks when it falls through the trees in the evening. I like to think he'd have liked that. He used to say the sky belonged to those who respected it, not those who tried to own it. I didn't understand that back then. I do now. People ask if I miss flying. I tell them no, but that's not true. I miss the feeling of being weightless, of leaving the world behind for a few precious seconds. I miss the hum of the engine before takeoff, that moment when fear and wonder shared the same breath. I even miss the danger, in a way, the sharpness it gave to life. You never felt more alive than when you were one bad turn away from dying, but that kind of living has a price, and you pay for it with the rest of your years. The older I get, the more I realize survival isn't about luck or skill. It's about learning how to carry the memories without letting them crush you. Sometimes the neighbors' kids come around, asking about the war for their school projects. They bring notebooks and wide eyes and questions that don't have easy answers. Was it scary? They ask. Did you kill anyone? I tell them it was a different time, a different world. I tell them that bravery isn't what they think it is. It's not charging in without fear. It's doing what you have to do despite it. Then they thank me, write something down, and leave. And I sit there a while longer, staring at the empty sky, thinking how strange it is that something so far away can still live inside you like it happened yesterday. Every year, I go to the small airfield outside town. There's a memorial there, a slab of stone with the names of those who never came home. I trace Cole's name with my finger every time, the letters smooth from years of touch. Sometimes I bring a little flag, sometimes just a story. Last year, I brought my grandson. He asked what kind of plane I flew. I told him, a P-47 Thunderbolt. He smiled and said, "Cool name." I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "It was." He asked me if it was fast. I thought for a moment and then said, "Fast enough when it needed to be." I didn't tell him what it felt like to pull the trigger, to feel the guns shudder through the frame, to see what they did to the world below. Some truths belong only to those who lived them. When I lie awake at night, the memories don't scare me anymore. They visit, like old friends, some kind, some cruel, all honest. I used to think the laughter of the Germans haunted me, the way they mocked our Thunderbolts, the way they underestimated us. But what really stayed with me wasn't their laughter. It was the silence that followed, after the guns stopped, after the smoke cleared. That silence was the sound of everything we'd lost, and somehow, that silence is still beautiful to me, because it means it's over. So here I am, an old man with a tired heart, telling you a story about a plane that shouldn't have flown, a war that shouldn't have happened, and a boy who shouldn't have lived long enough to remember it. I don't tell it for glory. I tell it because some stories deserve to be carried, even when they hurt. Maybe that's what keeps them alive. Maybe that's what keeps us alive. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Like this story if it stayed with you, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I've still got a few left to tell before the sky finally takes me home.